The wind on the high plains doesn't just howl, it screams. For Olivia Gable, a widow surviving alone in the Dakota territories that scream, was the only voice she'd heard in a month. She was trapped not just by the crushing grief for her husband Robert, but by the predatory ambition of Barnaby Slater, the man who owned the nearby town and wanted her land. One night as a blizzard tried to tear her cabin apart, the wind brought a new sound, a human groan. What she found at her fence line, buried in snow, would change her life forever. A dying Lakota warrior, the very man her neighbors would hang, and the only soul who could save her from a fate worse than death. Olivia Gable pressed her forehead against the freezing glass of the single-pane window, the cold a welcome sharp distraction from the terror. The blizzard had been raging for 2 days, a solid white wall that had erased the world. It had erased the path to the creek, the outline of the barn, and the jagged peaks of the black hills on the horizon. It had. She prayed also erased the path to her door for Barnaby Slater. Her homestead Gable's Creek was isolated, a solid 30 miles from the burgeoning corrupt town of Redemption Creek. It was the isolation her late husband Robert had craved. "Room to breathe, Joe," he'd said, his voice full of a pioneer's optimism. "Room to build a life that's ours." That life had ended 3 months ago. Robert, a skilled horseman, had supposedly been thrown from his horse and fallen into a ravine. A freak accident, Sheriff Brody had called it, his eyes flat and disinterested. Olivia knew better. Robert didn't have freak accidents. Now his optimism felt like a curse. The isolation he'd cherished had become her prison. Barnaby Slater, the man who owned the bank, the saloon, and Sheriff Brody had made his intentions clear. He'd visited her 2 weeks after the funeral hat in his hands, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "A woman alone out here. It's not decent, Mrs. Gable, and it's not safe," he'd said, his portly frame filling her doorway. "The land's overmortgaged. Robert, bless his soul, was a dreamer, not a businessman. I'll give you a fair price, enough to get you back east where you belong." She'd refused. The land was all she had left of Robert. Slater had smiled a thin reptilian action that didn't touch his eyes. "The elements out here are harsh, Mom. They tend to convince people." The blizzard was just such an element. Her woodpile was dwindling. Her meager cattle were huddled in the small barn, their lowing frantic. A sudden violent thud against the cabin wall snapped her from her reverie. It wasn't the wind. It was solid. She grabbed the Winchester rifle Robert had taught her to use, her knuckles white. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice swallowed by the storm. Silence. Then a low, guttural sound, a groan of profound pain. She peered through the frosted glass again, wiping a circle clean. Nothing but white. But the sound had come from the porch. Slater's men. Hank or Pete sent to terrorize her, caught in their own storm. She hesitated, her heart hammering. Let them freeze. But the sound came again, weaker this time. It wasn't the sharp, angry sound of one of Slater's thugs. It was the sound of an animal dying. Clutching the rifle, she unbarred the heavy door. The wind tore it from her grasp, slamming it open against the interior wall. Snow exploded into the room, a freezing fog. And there, collapsed on her porch, was a man. He was not one of Slater's men. He was Lakota. His body was a map of brutal exposure, his dark hair matted with snow and frozen blood. He wore buckskins, but they were torn, and one side of his chest was a dark, saturated stain. He was barely conscious, his breath a shallow rattle. Olivia froze. This was a nightmare. This was worse than Slater. The U.S. Army was waging a bitter, unseen war just north of them. The settlers in Redemption Creek spoke of the Lakota, with a mixture of terror and genocidal hatred. To be found harboring a savage was a death sentence. They'd burn her out, and Sheriff Brody would call it justified. The man's eyes flickered open. They were dark, assessing, and held no fear. Only pain. She saw the wound then, a clean, round hole in his upper chest, high near the shoulder, but bad. A bullet wound. This man hadn't just been caught in the storm. He was fleeing. "Please!" He whispered a single cracked word. The wind screamed. Olivia looked out at the white void, then back at the dying man. Slater wanted her to be convinced by the harsh elements. He wanted her to be a weak, terrified widow. She thought of Robert, of his stubborn kindness. "Damn you!" she muttered, but it wasn't clear if she meant the man on her porch, Barnaby Slater, or her own conscience. She put the rifle down. He was heavy a dead weight, but desperation gave her strength. She grabbed him under the arms and dragged him inch by agonizing inch out of the blizzard and into her cabin. She kicked the door shut, the bar falling into place with a definitive thud. The blizzard screamed, but inside there was a new, dangerous silence, broken only by the man's ragged breathing. She had just saved a dying Lakota warrior. She had also, she was quite sure, just signed her own death warrant. For the first 24 hours, the world was reduced to the space between the man's shallow breaths. The storm raged, a relentless white fury that provided a perfect, terrifying cover. No one, not even Slater's most determined men, would be riding in this. Olivia and her guest were utterly alone, locked in a battle against the man's impending death. She cut away the frozen buckskin shirt. The wound was ugly. The bullet was still in there, lodged deep. The flesh around it was already hot and puckered with infection. He was burning with fever, his body oscillating between rigid shivers and limp, overheated unconsciousness. Olivia was not a nurse. She was a homesteader. She knew how to set a chicken's leg and how to clean a wound on a cow. This was different. This was a man. She boiled water, sterilized Robert's sharpest skinning knife in the fire, and poured half a cup of whiskey down the man's throat. He choked, his eyes flying open, dark and unseeing, before he lapsed back into delirium. He began to murmur, not in English, but in the low rhythmic tones of his own language. "Forgive me, Robert," she whispered, taking the hot knife and pressing it to the man's flesh. He didn't scream. His body arched off the cot with a terrible silent tension, and then he was still. She probed the wound, her stomach roiling, her hands slick with blood. She was shaking so hard she almost gave up. Then her fingers brushed against the hard metallic lump. With a desperate half-sobbing grunt, she hooked the knife around it and pulled. The lead bullet, deformed and bloody, dropped into the metal basin with a clink. The man exhaled a long, shuddering sigh and fell into a deeper state of unconsciousness. For 2 more days, she fought the fever. She forced broth and willow bark tea between his lips. She bathed him with snowmelt, trying to cool the fire that was consuming him from within. She barely slept, dozing in her rocking chair, the Winchester always across her lap. She was his protector and his prisoner. On the morning of the 4th day, the blizzard broke. The world was eerily, painfully bright, the sun reflecting off an ocean of pristine snow. The silence of the cabin was different too. She turned. The man was awake. His eyes were clear, the fever gone. He was watching her. He was propped up on one elbow, his bandaged chest a stark white against his dark skin. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps her own age, with a strong, angular face that was currently a mask of wary neutrality. "The storm is over," she said, her voice hoarse. He nodded, his gaze sweeping the small, clean cabin. He noted the rifle by her chair, the meager provisions on her shelf, the single wedding portrait on the mantel. "Where?" he asked, his voice rough. "Gable's Creek. My land." "Who shot you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He looked down at his bandaged chest, then back at her. "Men with no faces." The vagueness of the answer was more chilling than a name. "They think I am dead," he said. "It is better this way." "You'll need to leave," she said more harshly than she intended. "I can't. It's not safe for me for you to be here." "I know," he said simply. He pushed himself to sit up fully, a grimace of pain tightening his features, but he didn't cry out. "I am Cole." "Olivia," she replied. They sat in silence. The barrier between them was immense, race language a war. Yet she had pulled a bullet from his chest. He was alive because of her. She was in mortal danger because of him. It was a bond of a terrible and unbreakable kind. A sharp, sudden thump on the porch, not a knock, the kick of a boot. "Mrs. Gable, you alive in there?" Olivia's blood turned to ice. It was Hank, Slater's right-hand man. Cole's hand instinctively went to his side where a knife would have been. Finding none, his eyes locked on her Winchester. "Get in the root cellar," she hissed, pointing to the trap-door hidden under a bearskin rug. "I do not hide," he said, his voice low and proud. "You will," she snapped, leveling the rifle at him. "You will, or they will kill us both. I saved your life, you owe me this." His eyes flashed angry and proud, but he saw the terrified truth in her face. He swung his legs off the cot, wincing, and lifted the heavy trap-door. He descended into the darkness just as the cabin door rattled violently. "I'm coming, I'm coming!" Olivia shouted, kicking the rug over the door. She frantically rearranged the cot, throwing a quilt over the blood-stained mattress. She grabbed a shawl, pulling it around her shoulders, and took a deep breath. Then she unbarred the door. Hank and Pete stood there, their faces chapped and red from the cold their eyes mean. "Took you long enough, widow," Hank sneered. He was a tall, skeletal man with a perpetual cruel twist to his lips. Pete was his opposite, short, brutish, and silent. "The storm," Olivia said, clutching the shawl. The bar was frozen. Hank's eyes pushed past her, scanning the cabin. "Storm's over. Mr. Slater was worried about you. Sent us to check on your well-being." "As you can see, I'm fine." Hank's gaze lingered on the cot. "You look tired, Mrs. Gable, like you ain't slept." "I haven't. I've been tending the livestock. The barn roof nearly caved." Hank chuckled a dry, rattling sound. Hard work for a woman. Too hard. He took a step inside, and Olivia's hand tightened on the doorframe. He sniffed the air. "Smells strange in here, like lye. And something else." Olivia's heart was in her throat. The root cellar. The smell of blood of Cole. "I've been boiling laundry, Mr. Hank," she said coolly, "and I had to put down a calf that broke its leg. If you've come to offer help, grab a shovel and help me clear the barn. Otherwise—" Hank's eyes narrowed. He was unused to her spine. He looked at Pete. "Heard anything unusual, widow?" The storm pushed a lot of trouble down from the hills. "Renegades." "The only unusual thing I've heard, Mr. Hank, is your voice at my door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She held his gaze. Under the floorboards, she could feel a perfect, tense stillness. Cole was listening. Hank stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He was looking for a crack, a sliver of fear to exploit. Olivia gave him nothing but ice. Finally, he laughed, but it was forced. "Feisty. Mr. Slater ain't gonna like that. He'll be by in a few days to talk sense to you. See you try and hold a rifle on him." He and Pete turned and mounted their horses, their figures dark against the blinding snow. Olivia watched them until they were small specks, then slowly, carefully rebarred the door. She collapsed against it, her legs finally giving out. The trapdoor lifted. Cole emerged, his face grim. He had heard it all. He had seen her lie to them, seen her stand up to them. "They will be back," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Olivia whispered. "This Slater. He wants your land. He wants everything." Cole looked around the small, simple cabin. He looked at the woman who had saved him and who had just protected him. "You are not safe," he said. "Not because of me. Because of him." "I know," she said, finding her feet. "I've known that since the day my husband died." The dynamic had shifted. She was no longer just his savior. They were now improbably allies. Cole healed with a speed that astonished Olivia. The Lakota were as a people resilient, and he was a prime example. But it was more than that. He seemed to draw strength from the land itself, even this small, fenced-in patch of it. He could not leave. The snow was deep, and his wound while closing was still a severe weakness. Hank and Pete's visit had made one thing clear: to be caught on the trail meant certain death. So for another week, he stayed a silent ghost in her small home. They fell into a strange domestic rhythm. By day, he remained in the root cellar, a dark, cold space that he endured with stoic patience. Olivia would bring him food and fresh water, and they would talk, their conversations clipped and careful. He told her his tracking party had been ambushed. He had been separated, shot, and left for dead. He spoke of the bad medicine that had infected the land of white men who spoke with forked tongues and killed for yellow rock and green paper. He never directly named Barnaby Slater, but his eyes were hard when he spoke of men who stole the land from under a widow's feet. She in turn spoke of Robert. She told Cole about their dream about building this cabin with their own hands, about the well they had dug, and she told him about Robert's accident and the ravine he was found in. Cole listened, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "A good horseman does not fall," he said simply. "A good horse does not bolt unless it is spooked by something more than a snake." He was confirming her darkest fear. Robert had been murdered. At night, Cole would emerge from the cellar. He was too proud, too restless to sit idle. While she slept or pretended to, he would move about the property. One night, she awoke to the sound of a dull thud. Thud, thud. She grabbed the rifle, her heart leaping, only to see him through the window in the bright moonlight splitting her woodpile. He was working with one arm, his bandaged side held stiff, but he moved with a fluid, powerful efficiency, stacking the wood neatly by her door. Another night he was gone for hours. She panicked, thinking he'd left only to find him at dawn, driving her scattered cattle back into the barn. He'd spent the night tracking them through the snow and had repaired the section of fence that Hank and Pete had clearly cut. He was repaying his debt. He was protecting her just as she had protected him. In this shared silence, a profound respect grew. She saw in him not the savage of Slater's warnings, but a man of deep honor and quiet strength. He saw in her not a weak, hysterical widow, but a woman of iron will fighting a lone war. On the 8th day, the snow had melted enough to make travel possible, though treacherous. The air was warmer. "I leave tonight," Cole said, standing by the window, looking out at the trail Hank and Pete had made. Olivia's heart felt a strange, sharp pang. She had grown used to the presence of another living soul to the quiet alliance. Now the fear would return tenfold. "Where will you go?" she asked. "My people are north. I will find them." He turned to her. "You are not safe here, Olivia. This land, it is poisoned by that man, Slater. He will not stop. This is my home," she said, her voice stubborn. It's all I have left of Robert. I will not be driven off." Cole studied her, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. "You have courage, but courage is not a bullet." He reached into a small leather pouch at his waist, one he must have hidden in his boot. He pulled out a small, smooth object. He had been working on it in the cellar, she realized. All those hours in the dark he'd been carving. He pressed it into her hand. It was a piece of soapstone, warm from his touch. He had carved it into the shape of a small bird, a hawk or an eagle, its wings spread wide for flight. It was simple but beautiful. "The Lakota call your name Wiaka Wang Bli," he said, his voice soft. "Eagle feather. But I see a different bird, one that flies against the wind. Do not let them break your wings." Olivia closed her hand around the token, the smooth stone, a solid, comforting weight. "I don't know how to thank you, Cole." "You did not let me die," he said. "That is a debt that cannot be repaid. It can only be lived." He looked once more around the cabin, a silent farewell. Then he touched his hand to his forehead in a gesture of respect, and was gone. He didn't use the door. He slipped out the back window and vanished into the blue-gray twilight, melting into the shadows of the pines. He made no sound. Olivia stood alone in the center of her cabin. The silence was heavier, more profound than before. She was truly alone again. But as she clutched the small stone bird, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt since Robert's death, not just grief, but a cold, hard ember of resolve. His spirit, as the title would say, had not left. It was here in her hand. It was the will to fight. The weeks that followed Cole's departure were a slow, agonizing tightening of a noose. The winter held its breath, the snows receded, and the mud-caked trails to Redemption Creek became passable again. With the spring thaw came Barnaby Slater. He arrived not with his thugs, but with a buggy and a lawyer, a thin, whey-faced man from Cheyenne named Mr. Diggs. Slater himself was a vision of false prosperity. He wore a tailored wool suit, a heavy gold watch chain draped across his ample stomach. He represented progress and civilization, and he saw Olivia's homestead as a stubborn, backward obstacle. "Mrs. Gable," he boomed, stepping onto her porch without invitation. "A trying winter. I am so relieved to see you've weathered it." "I weathered it, Mr. Slater." "No thanks to you," Olivia said. She stood in the doorway, the Winchester in her hands, pointed at the floor but clearly visible. Slater chuckled, ignoring the rifle. "Still as prickly as a cactus, I see. A fine quality in a woman in small doses." He gestured to the man beside him. "This is Mr. Diggs. He handles my legal affairs. We've come with a final, very generous offer." "I am not selling." Mr. Diggs stepped forward, opening a leather satchel. "Ma'am, if you'll just look at the paperwork. Your late husband, Mr. Gable, took out a substantial loan against this property. Not from the bank, but from a private consortium, which Mr. Slater now represents. The payments are to be frank 3 months in arrears." Olivia's blood ran cold. "A private loan, Robert he never told me. Men often try to shield their failures from their wives." Slater said, his voice a poisonous syrup. "He was in over his head. He leveraged the land to buy feed and seed that I'm told never even made it to market. The loan is due, in full." I don't have that kind of money," Olivia stammered. "Of course you don't." Slater boomed, his neighborly facade evaporating. "Which is why my offer is so generous. I will buy the debt. I will pay you $500 cash for this shack, and you can walk away clean. A fresh start." $500 was an insult. The land with its access to the creek was worth 10 times that. "And if I refuse, Slater's smile vanished. Then, Mrs. Gable, the law must take its course. Mr. Diggs will file for foreclosure. The property will go to public auction, and given the outstanding debt, I assure you there will be only one bidder. Me. And you will be left with nothing. Not even the 500. He was backing her into a corner. He had fabricated a debt, or preyed on one she never knew existed. She clutched the soapstone bird in her pocket. It was a solid, tangible reminder. Fly against the wind. Get off my land, Mr. Slater. Slater's face turned a dull, mottled red. He had not expected this. He had expected tears, begging. You are making a grave mistake, madam, Mr. Diggs whispered, shuffling his papers nervously. You have 1 week, Olivia. Slater spat, his civility gone. 1 week to sign the papers. After that, I will enjoy watching Sheriff Brody drag you off this land personally. He and Diggs left. Olivia watched them go, her body rigid with a combination of terror and fury. The attacks began 2 days later. They were petty cruel and designed to break her. She awoke one morning to find her well fouled. Someone had dumped a bag of lye and a dead coyote into it. It would take her a month to clean it if it was salvageable at all. She would have to haul water by bucket from the creek 1/2 mile away. The next night, her 3 remaining cattle were gone. The fence was not cut. The gate was simply open. She spent 2 days tracking them, only to find their carcasses shot and left to rot in a gully. It was a message: you cannot survive here. She rode to Redemption Creek, her face a mask of grim determination. She would go to the law. Sheriff Brody's office was a small, dusty room that smelled of stale tobacco and sweat. Brody himself was a large, lazy man, his badge a small, dull star on a stained vest. He listened to her report, his feet up on his desk, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. Well now, Mrs. Gable, he said when she'd finished, his voice a slow drawl. That's a whole peck of trouble, ain't it? It's Barnaby Slater, and you know it. He's trying to drive me out. Brody swung his feet to the floor, his chair creaking in protest. He stood up, towering over her. You're making a very serious accusation, little lady. Mr. Slater is the most respected man in this county. He built this town. He's a thief and a bully. He's a businessman, Brody corrected her. And what I hear is he made you a right generous offer on that failing piece of rock you call a homestead. Now, as for your complaints, sounds to me like you got a problem with Indians. Indians? Sure. That's Indian work, ain't it? Poisoning a well, slaughtering cattle for no reason. That ain't a white man's way. That's a savage's. I heard the storm pushed a lot of 'em down this way. You're isolated out there. You're attracting 'em. He was twisting it. He was using the town's prejudice as a weapon against her. He was painting her as the problem. You're not going to do anything, are you? She said, her voice flat. I'll file a report. Brody shrugged, sitting back down. But my advice? Take Mr. Slater's offer. Go back east. This is no country for a woman, especially one who makes trouble. Olivia walked out of the sheriff's office into the muddy street. The people of Redemption Creek watched her, their faces closed and suspicious. Brody had already done his work. She was an outcast. She was the woman who attracted trouble. She was completely, utterly on her own. The noose was tightening. Barnaby Slater was not a patient man. Olivia's refusal, her stubbornness, had become a personal affront. He had expected her to crumble. Instead, she was hauling water from the creek and barring her door. He decided it was time to move from convincing to condemning. He needed to turn the town fully against her, to make her eviction a public necessity. He summoned Hank and Pete to the back room of his saloon, the Redemption Saloon and Hotel, which he owned. She's a problem, Slater said, pouring 3 glasses of whiskey. "She's tougher than Robert was. And she's mouthy." Went to Brody. Cried foul play. "Brody handled it," Hank said, downing the whiskey in one gulp. "He's pointing the finger at the Lakota." "Good," Slater grunted. "We're going to give him some proof." He laid out his plan. It was simple, and it was evil. That night, Olivia was startled from a light, anxious sleep by the smell of smoke. She ran outside. The small hay shed 50 yards from her cabin was ablaze. The flames licked at the dark sky, a terrifying orange beacon. It was too late to save it. The hay was dry. The shed was old. She could only watch it burn, her heart sinking as another piece of her life turned to ash. This wasn't a warning. It was an escalation. But the fire served a second, more sinister purpose. It was a signal. By dawn, Sheriff Brody and a posse of townsfolk were at her property. They had seen the smoke from town. "More trouble, Mrs. Gable." Brody said, his face a mask of false concern. He dismounted and began to walk the perimeter of the burned-out shed. "You know who did this?" "Sheriff," Olivia said, her voice raw with exhaustion. "I surely do," Brody said, bending down. "And it's just as I thought." He stood up, holding something in his hand. It was an arrowhead, a cheap, poorly made arrow, but clearly in the Indian style. "Found this right by the foundation, ma'am," Brody said, holding it up for the posse to see. "They set the fire, and it looks like they dropped this." It was a plant. It was so clumsy, so obvious that Olivia wanted to scream. "That's a lie!" she shouted. "You planted that, or Slater's men did," the townsfolk muttered. "She's hysterical," one of them said. "Ma'am," Brody said, his voice turning hard, "you're overwrought. We got evidence. This plus your other complaints. It's clear you're being targeted by renegades. You're putting the whole town at risk by staying out here. You're an invitation to them." He had done it. He had framed her not for a crime, but as a danger. "That land ain't worth your life, ma'am," one of the posse members called out. "Slater's offer is more than fair. This is my home," she cried, but her voice was lost in their self-righteous fear. They left satisfied. They now had a reason for Olivia's troubles. It wasn't their respected town founder. It was the faceless, savage other. But Slater had made a mistake. That evening in the Redemption Saloon, Hank and Pete were celebrating. They were drinking free whiskey, supplied by a grateful Barnaby Slater. Pete, the slower, more brutal of the two, was drunk. "Did you see her face?" Pete slurred to Hank, loud enough for the entire bar to hear. "When Brody held up that arrow, looked like she'd swallowed a toad." "Shut your mouth, you fool," Hank muttered, glancing around. "What we're heroes. We're running the savages out." Pete laughed, slamming his glass down. "Burned that shack down real good. She'll be gone by morning." Most of the saloon patrons laughed with him or ignored him. But one man sitting in the dark corner did not. Mr. Matthias was the town's undertaker. He was a quiet, perpetually somber man, thin as a rail, who dressed in black and rarely spoke. He had buried Robert Gable. He had seen the man's body, noted the unusual contusions that didn't match a simple fall. But Matthias was a man who survived by seeing nothing. He was by nature a coward. He heard Pete's drunken boasts. He heard Hank trying to quiet him. And he knew with chilling certainty that Olivia Gable was telling the truth. He knew she was being systematically, cruelly destroyed by the man who owned the town. Matthias finished his small beer, paid his nickel, and slipped out of the saloon, his face paler than usual. 2 days later, the foreclosure notice was nailed to Olivia's door. It was official. A public auction of the Gables Creek homestead would be held in 1 week. The reason given was failure to pay outstanding debts. Olivia read the notice, her vision blurring with tears of rage and helplessness. She had lost. Slater had fouled her, well killed, her cattle burned, her shed turned the town against her, and now, with a piece of paper, he was taking her home. She went back inside the cabin and sat on the cot. She pulled the small soapstone bird from her pocket. She had tried to fly against the wind, and her wings were broken. The week passed in a haze of defeated despair. Olivia moved through the motions of survival, but the fight had gone out of her. She began to pack, sorting Robert's few possessions into a small trunk. What was the point? Slater had won. She was a widow alone, and the entire system, the law, the town, the economy, was his personal weapon. Every time she looked at the foreclosure notice on her door, she felt a fresh wave of sickness. This wasn't just land. It was a grave. Slater was dancing on Robert's grave. The day before the auction, she stopped packing. She was holding Robert's favorite shirt, burying her face in the faded scent of him, when her fingers brushed the soapstone bird in her pocket. Fly against the wind. A new feeling, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of her grief. It wasn't hope. It was rage. She would not slink away. She would not let Barnaby Slater have the satisfaction of finding her gone. If he was going to take her home, he would have to look her in the eye while he did it, and she would make one last attempt to expose him for what he was. She saddled her horse, the last one she owned, and rode to Redemption Creek. She didn't go to the sheriff. She went to the only other place of authority, the church. It was a small clapboard building, tended by the same man who handled the town's dead, Mr. Matthias. She found him in the small cemetery behind the church, polishing a new headstone. "Mr. Matthias," she said. He jumped, startled, dropping his rag. "Mrs. Gable, my condolences. About the fire and the auction. Save your condolences, sir. I need a witness." "A witness?" he stammered, wringing his hands. "To what? To the truth. I know you heard Pete in the saloon. I know you know Slater is behind this, that he burned my shed." Matthias went deathly pale. He looked around, terrified. "Mrs. Gable, I don't know what you're talking about. I keep to myself. I don't listen to barroom talk. They are destroying my life, Mr. Matthias. They murdered my husband." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. "You cannot know that," he whispered, his eyes wide. "You buried him. You saw his body. You knew it wasn't a fall. You know," she pressed her voice, low and fierce. "You are a man of God, are you not? You preach about truth and righteousness every Sunday. Where is your righteousness now?" Matthias flinched, as if she had struck him. He looked at the church, then at the saloon across the street, then at the cold, hard ground. "I am a humble servant, Mrs. Gable. I have no power. Slater, he owns this town. He signs my pay. If I spoke out, he would ruin you." Olivia finished, her voice bitter. "Or bury you. I understand. You're a coward." She turned to leave. His cowardice was just another brick in the wall she was facing. "Wait," he called out, his voice thin. She turned back. He was trembling, a man at war with his own conscience. I cannot testify," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't. He will destroy me." "But you are right. About Robert. About the fire." He reached into his pocket. "I can't stop the auction, but maybe this can help you, somewhere else." He pressed a small, worn leather pouch into her hand. It was heavy. "What is this?" "It was in Robert's pocket when I prepared him. Sheriff Brody had already inspected the body. He said it was just personal effects. But I recognized the mark. I held it back. I was afraid." Olivia opened the pouch. Inside was a single heavy piece of rock. It was dull, but it was shot through with a thick, unmistakable vein of gleaming yellow. Gold. "This is from our creek," she whispered. "No," Matthias said, looking over his shoulder again. "That's not from your creek. That mark on it, that's a Sayers slag. It came from Slater's private mine north of here. The one he bought from the government. The one that's supposed to be empty." Olivia was confused. "What does this mean?" Robert. He wasn't just a farmer, Mrs. Gable. He was a geologist of a sort. He'd been prospecting. I think he found out Slater's empty mine wasn't empty. I think he found out Slater has been high-grading, stealing thousands in gold from government land, not reporting it, not paying taxes on it. And I think Robert, having this in his pocket, is why he fell into that ravine. It all clicked into place. The mortgage, the pressure, the murder. It wasn't just about her land. Her land was a problem because it was adjacent to Slater's real operation. Robert must have found out, and Slater had him killed. Now he needed her gone to secure the entire area, to silence anyone who might find what Robert had found. He killed him for a rock," she whispered, horrified. "He killed him for a mountain of rocks, Mrs. Gable," Matthias said. "And he will kill you, too. Take this. Leave. Go to the federal marshals in Cheyenne. It's your only chance." Olivia looked at the gold, then at the undertaker. He was still a coward. But he had given her the truth. It was a more powerful weapon than her rifle. But Cheyenne was 100 miles away. The auction was tomorrow at 10. "Thank you, Mr. Matthias," she said, her voice hard as steel. "You have no idea what you've done." She got on her horse. She wasn't riding to Cheyenne. She was riding back to her homestead. She would be there for the auction. She would be there to see Barnaby Slater's face when she accused him publicly of murder and federal theft. She might not survive it, but she would fly one last time directly into the wind. The morning of the auction was bright and cold, a cruel mockery of a beautiful day. By 9:30 they had all gathered, Barnaby Slater dressed in his finest suit, Sheriff Brody looking smug, his hand resting on his pistol, Hank and Pete leaning against the fence, grinning, and at least 20 townsfolk, a gallery of witnesses, their faces a mixture of pity, curiosity, and greed. Mr. Matthias stood at the back of the crowd, his face as pale as a shroud, his hands steepled in prayer or terror. Olivia stood on her porch. She was not packing. She was not crying. She was dressed in her best black dress, her hair pinned up the Winchester, leaning against the doorframe, and the piece of gold ore heavy in her pocket. An auctioneer brought in from Cheyenne stood on a wagon bed. "All right, folks, let's get this unfortunate business underway," he called out. "We are here to auction the property known as Gable's Creek, foreclosed upon for, non-payment of debt." "A tragedy," Slater said loudly to the crowd. "I tried to help her. Some people just won't accept charity," the auctioneer began. "The property includes 60 acres, a 2-room cabin, a barn, and access to the creek. We'll start the bidding at $100. Do I hear 100? 100. Slater called out immediately, a bored look on his face. "I have 100 from Mr. Slater. Do I hear 120? The crowd was silent. No one would bid against Slater. "Going once." "Wait," Olivia said. Her voice was clear and sharp, cutting through the murmuring crowd. Every head turned to her. "This is not a foreclosure," she said, walking down the porch steps. "It's a theft, and it is not about debt. It is about this." She strode into the center of the yard and held up the piece of gold ore. The sun caught the vein. The crowd gasped. Slater's face, for one brief, flashing instant, lost its composure. His eyes widened, and his florid face went pale. It was a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He recovered immediately, but Olivia had seen it. So had Matthias. "What is this nonsense?" Slater blustered. The woman's addled. "Grief, you know." "This," Olivia announced, "was in my husband Robert's pocket when he died. This is gold ore, Mr. Slater, from your empty federal mine. He knew you were high-grading. He knew you were stealing from the government, and that is why you had him murdered." A collective shockwave went through the crowd. This was no longer a simple foreclosure. This was an accusation of murder. Sheriff Slater roared, his face now purple with rage. "This woman is hysterical. She's slandering me. Arrest her." Sheriff Brody drew his pistol. "Mrs. Gable, you're coming with me. You're disturbing the peace." "She's telling the truth," a thin voice cried out. Mr. Matthias stepped forward from the back of the crowd, his hands shaking so badly he could barely stand. I heard them. I heard Pete and Hank bragging in the saloon. They set her fire. They planted the arrow. It was all a lie. I gave her the gold. I found it on Robert Gable's body." The crowd was in an uproar. Slater's men, Hank and Pete, drew their own guns, looking to Slater for a command. Slater was apoplectic. "Kill him, kill them both!" Slater screamed, his mask of civilization completely gone. "They're insane!" Brody leveled his pistol at Olivia. Hank and Pete leveled theirs at Matthias. It was over. She had spoken the truth, and it had only shortened her life. "I wouldn't do that, Sheriff." The voice was new. It was deep calm and carried absolute authority. The crowd parted. 4 riders had approached unseen, unheard during the confrontation. They were not townsfolk. They wore dusters and they carried repeating rifles. The man in the lead dismounted. He was tall, his features sharp and angular, his eyes dark and assessing. He moved with a grace that was both predatory and controlled. He pushed back his duster, revealing the badge pinned to his vest. A U.S. Marshal's star. He looked at Olivia, and his eyes softened for just 1 second. It was Cole. Deputy U.S. Marshal Cole Browning. He announced, his voice silencing the entire yard. "And this is a federal matter." Olivia's knees buckled. She grabbed the wagon wheel for support. Cole Browning. A Western name. A life she couldn't have imagined. "Marshal." Slater stammered, his pistol hand dropping. What is the meaning of this? This is a local dispute. This woman, Cole interrupted his voice, like ice, is a material witness. I've been tracking your operation for 6 months, Slater. Ever since you and your men ambushed my partner and me, and left me for dead. He touched his chest right where Olivia's bandage had been. I was investigating reports of illegal high-grading and gun-running to renegade factions. Your little mine has been the source of it all. You've been funding a private, bloody war. Cole looked at Hank and Pete. The bullet this woman dug out of my chest. It was a .44 caliber from a Winchester 73. Just like the ones you two carry. I've been waiting to get close to you again. This is a lie, Brody blustered. You have no proof. I have the testimony of Mr. Matthias, Cole said, nodding to the trembling undertaker. I have bank records from Cheyenne showing massive untaxed deposits, and I have the bullet. He looked at Olivia. And I have her. That's all the proof I need. Arrest them, Cole said to his deputies. In a flash, it was over. Brody, Hank, and Pete, seeing the rifles leveled at them, dropped their guns. They were cuffed. Slater undone his entire empire. Crumbling made one last desperate move. He lunged, grabbing Olivia, pulling her in front of him as a shield and pressing his own pistol to her head. "No, you'll back off. You'll let me go," he screamed. Olivia didn't panic. She looked at Cole. Cole's face was unreadable, his own pistol drawn, but he couldn't get a clear shot. "It's over, Slater," Cole said calmly. "It's over when I say it's over you." Olivia acted. She drove her elbow hard into Slater's soft stomach. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening she needed. She stomped her heel down on his instep, and as he roared in pain, she grabbed the hand holding the pistol and bit down hard. He screamed a high-pitched wail, and the gun clattered to the ground. Olivia threw herself aside. Cole was already moving. He didn't shoot. He slammed the barrel of his rifle into Slater's head, a single, precise, brutal motion. The big man collapsed like a sack of grain, unconscious, before he hit the dirt. Silence descended on Gable's Creek. Cole holstered his pistol and walked over to Olivia, who was breathing hard, her hands bleeding where Slater had grabbed her. He gently took her hands, inspecting them. Then he looked at her face. "You fly against the wind," he said, a small, rare smile touching his lips. "You came back," she whispered. "My investigation brought me back," he corrected softly. "Destiny. Made sure I wasn't too late." He bent down and picked up the piece of gold ore. "This," he said, "is federal evidence. It will ensure he never sees the light of day, and—" He turned to the stunned auctioneer. "This auction is concluded. The property is not for sale. The fabricated debt is null and void." He then looked at Olivia, his eyes holding the memory of the blizzard, the wound and the quiet cabin. "The land is yours, Mrs. Gable. Free and clear. Robert Gable's death has been avenged." He had to leave. He and his deputies had to transport the prisoners to Cheyenne, but as he mounted his horse, he paused and looked back at her. "Your spirit," he said, "it's a strong one. Don't ever let it be broken." "Yours. It followed me, Cole," she replied, clutching the soapstone bird in her pocket. "It kept me alive." He nodded, a promise passing between them. He turned his horse and rode away, a U.S. Marshal, a Lakota warrior, and the man who had, in saving himself, saved her. Olivia Gable stood on her land, for the first time truly free. That day on the high plains, justice wasn't found in a courtroom. It was delivered by the very man the town would have condemned. Olivia Gable not only kept her land, but she became a symbol of resilience, the widow who had faced down the most powerful, corrupt man in the territory, and won. The spirit that had followed her wasn't a ghost. It was the echo of her own courage, a courage she'd discovered while saving a stranger's life. Cole's path had been set by his duty, but it was Olivia's kindness that ensured he survived to see it through. Destiny didn't just bring them together to serve justice. It brought them together to prove that even in the lawless wild, an act of compassion can be more powerful than a bullet. We hope this story reminded you that courage often means protecting others, even at great risk to yourself. If this story of survival justice and destined paths crossing touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who loves a powerful drama. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another true life story. Thank you for listening.